In the past, famous researchers spent most of their lives in oblivion, which slowed down research from moving forward. Does this still happen today? This video is essential for anyone involved with, thinking about getting involved with, or curious about research. I'm Tzvi. I have a PhD in neuroscience, an MD, and a degree in computer science. I've worked in academia, hospitals, industry, and have come up with a better computational model of how I think the brain recognizes. And I will let you in on a few secrets about research. How was research inhibited in the past? Let's start with medicine, the study of epidemics and how they spread, because it's pandemic season. John Snow, the father of epidemiology, methodically pored over variables and single-handedly developed a way to isolate disease sources, and found out that cholera is associated with feces in the water. He could not publish his work where researchers at the time would readily read it. He had to publish it in 1849 on his own dime, which cost him several times his yearly salary, and still no one read it. Theories from the days of the Greeks and Romans predominated, that virtually all disease was born from bad air. And his hopeless publication would not change that. Briefly, when 500 people died in a cholera outbreak in 1854, and John Snow isolated the source to a single contaminated water pump, that authorities in desperation listened and took off the handle to the pump as he recommended, so that it won't be used. But as soon as the pandemic was over, they recommissioned the pump, continuing to expose people to cholera. They ignored his findings, and when John Snow died, that pump was still pumping. Cholera was rampant, and the matter was closed. Hand washing was a big issue. In 1795, Alexander Gordon of Aberdeen, Scotland, suggested a revolutionary idea that fevers were infectious processes. And even worse, that physicians could be carriers and need to be cleaned or even dispose of dirty things. Now, despite still following conventions of the time, bloodletting, and ideas of bad air, he faced resistance and scorn for his new suggestions, and died unknown. But even worse is the story of Ignaz Semmelweis and his activism about 50 years after Gordon. After obtaining his MD, Ignaz joined a large Vienna University hospital as what's equivalent today as a chief resident. A doctor who is towards the end of his residency manages other residents and students in the clinics before being certified as a specialist. And in this case, it was obstetrics, taking care of mothers and babies during and after birth. During those times, the mortality rate of giving birth was huge, about 1 in 6 or 16%. The Vienna Teaching Hospital had 2 clinics in 1848, one run by doctors and the other a free clinic run by midwives, which are nurse-like specialists for giving birth. Both had teachers and students, respectively. But the mortality rate of the doctor's clinic was 16%, while the free midwife clinic had less. Despite being more crowded, and treating people off the street. No one could figure out why. And the same bad air theories and sick patient bleeding to ventilate blood did not help. Semmelweis noticed that the medical students were working on cadavers before delivering. And doctors poked by the medical instruments developed similar symptoms as the women. So he instituted hand and tool washing between patients in both the clinics. And the death rates went down to 1.3%. Now, his reward was that his boss not only replaced him when his contract was over, but also blocked him from getting other positions. In response, Semmelweis petitioned to be a docent, a private lecturer who taught students and who had access to university facilities. At first, because of his boss's clout, Semmelweis was denied, but he petitioned, and after more than 18 months, he was accepted, but with terms designed to block him. For example, he didn't have access to cadavers, and he could only teach using leather-fabricated mannequins. Fortunately, he came from a reasonably wealthy family from Budapest and returned to Pest accepting a non-paid position for 6 years. And he did the same in the new clinic, reducing the mortality to 0.85%. Yet again, he faced resistance at every step. When the boss died, his peers did not want Semmelweis to replace him. But the person they chose did not speak Hungarian. So the government intervened on Semmelweis's behalf. He published his book in 1861 with combined data from both Vienna and Budapest, but to poor reviews. And things got worse from there. You would think resistance in educated people within academia is ridiculous, especially when lives matter. But this extreme and mind-boggling resistance is found in every field. The father of modern-day genetics, Gregor Mendel, observed patterns of genes progressing through generations of plants. But his work was not published where it would be seen until it was discovered and republished in a popular academic journal much beyond his death. In chemistry, John James Watterson is a neglected pioneer of the modern molecular theory of gases, which has greatly changed modern chemistry and physics. When Watterson submitted his paper, the referee of the Royal Society rejected the paper and wrote, "This paper is nothing but nonsense." Watterson also had to hopelessly publish on his own dime, and as a result, Watterson's work lay in oblivion until rescued some 45 years later. An example in electrical engineering is Greg Ohm, who described what is commonly known today as Ohm's law, basic relations between current and voltage that anyone who works with electricity, from electricians to digital circuit designers, knows. Some of Ohm's contributions were not recognized for over 20 years until the years right before his death. I've given 3 examples, and there are many more. But think about it. Can you imagine how these founding scientists felt? They worked hard, came up with new ideas, and then they spent the rest of their lives trying to educate educated people that claim to be interested in new research and moving the field forward, but to utterly fail. Can you imagine the personal toll, questioning everything, including sanity? Is something wrong with me? This is so basic. And is today, because their work simplified understanding, essential to move the field forward. What am I doing wrong? Why am I in poverty? Why are others able to make a living off of science while I cannot? And they died with this. Nothing they did changed that fate. But with support, they would have carried their work even further and would have been able to help other researchers further as well. For example, at the time, Darwin would have greatly benefited from seeing Mendel's work. But you don't have to die unknown to feel this resistance. Lamenting over these types of difficulties in academia, Hermann von Helmholtz, a truly multidisciplinary researcher who contributed to the fields of physics, psychology, and neuroscience, famously stated that the more original a new idea, the more time the new idea needs in order to gain acceptance among researchers. And this runs counter to how researchers often see themselves as open-minded. And if you think awareness of this helps solve the problem, you're in for a sad realization. Physicist Max Planck, who happened to be a student of Helmholtz, wrote that a new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up familiar with it. Now, because Max Planck was a student of Helmholtz, I can't help but wonder if he's referring to his mentor, who suffered the same a generation before. As one of these scientists, you may appreciate how the science can be a popularity contest. Now, can you imagine, especially in the case of Ignaz Semmelweis, his cause was much beyond just recognition. He wanted patients to stop dying. And still, nothing changed. The underlying resistance so strong. Ignaz tried everything he could, not just to become known, but also to help patients. He handed out pamphlets in the streets telling potential patients to ask for hygienic conditions. He wrote letters to practitioners in his field. He even accused them of being murderers due to their inhibition, which is true. But they got back at him. A surgeon, I wonder if he believed in washing hands, initiated papers ordering Semmelweis to an insane asylum, which back then amounted to torture. Guards beat Semmelweis, and his hand turned gangrenous, and he died 2 weeks later in 1865. So he was taken care of instead of them changing. Their resistance to change by authorities seems powerful, deep-seated, and so inexplicably so. But clearly, this is in the past. We've learned we have more education and access to information from around the world, from the internet.